The Wood Elves and the Skaven have gained new units to their roster with the Twisted and Twilight DLC. We're going to take a close-up look at the units themselves and their stats, as well as talk about what their role might be within the army. So let us begin, starting with... First off, the Sisters of Twilight. The new Wood Elves legendary lord. They are a flying lord only, so they have no ground options. They're either on an eagle mount or a forest dragon mount. Stat-wise, in melee, they're not too bad, nothing too special, don't have armor-piercing damage, not a ton of armor or melee defense, so they're not the strongest in melee, but they can do some work. Where they shine though, of course, is in the missile attack. They've got a lot of range and 2 firing mode options. Think of how the Eagle Claw bolt thrower works, it's basically like that. They have one which is anti-large and armor sundering and armor piercing, so that's your anti-large option, or you can switch to their more anti-infantry option, which applies a poison and still has the armor piercing damage. For their abilities, they have Conjoined Destiny, which is a big heal for nearly 2,000 hit points, but it takes about 30 seconds to cast it. It goes into kind of a preparing state and then heals over 1 second when that 30 seconds is up. So kind of a delayed heal, but only for themselves. And they have one item, Eagle Quiver, which is an armor-piercing magic missile. They also have Gwyndolor's Vantage, which is a constant buff to themselves, increasing their missile damage and reload skill, but only if there's no enemy within 70 meters of them. So going to be the lord of choice if you want a fast and mobile lord that can look after itself and still dish out lots of damage with those ranged attacks. And to another female legendary lord, Draika. She is a foot lord, so no mount options. Her combat stats are okay, kind of similar to the sisters. No armor piercing damage, but she does have magical attacks, a little bit more armor than the sisters. So she'll do okay fighting in more lightly armored crowds. She does have the physical resistance as well and a missile resistance, so she is tougher than she might look. But she is also a caster. She has the Law of Shadows, so she's got magic at her disposal. For her abilities, she's got a Winds of Magic buff, Smoke and Mirrors, and Roused to Wrath, which allows her to summon a unit of Dryads. Very nice. And she can do that twice as well. She also has an item that will increase enemy ability recharge time when she is casting. And she has one more passive ability, which is tied to her health. The more health she loses, the more she buffs nearby friendly troops, giving them base damage and melee attack. So for every 25% health she loses, she makes everyone else around her stronger, so a strong supporting lord overall, great for fighting alongside your infantries, got the magic there as well, so she's a nice choice. She is a foot lord though, so might be a little bit vulnerable sometimes, but overall pretty tough, and she has a whole bunch of tools at her disposal, the magic, the summons, and those buffing abilities. And to yet another female lord choice for the Wood Elves, the Spellweaver, and there's 5 different kinds of them, all with a different law of magic, which adds the dark and high magic lore books to the Wood Elves. Overall stats wise, they're very similar to the Spell Singers, not very good in melee, all about the magic, but they do have a variety of mount options, which is nice. Their abilities vary depending on which one you choose, but it's a lot of Winds of Magic buffs and a few buffs to the army. So these give a few nice options, the 2 new lore books to use, and also a cheap caster lord option, because the Wood Elves didn't really have one of those before. It was only really the Ancient Tree Man, who was of course very expensive, or Durthu. So you got a nice cheap option now to combine your lord and caster in one, so you can spend more money on the rest of your army if you wish. If you really need the most powerful lady though, then the Queen of Athel Loren is likely the one, although she is not a lord. I repeat, not a lord. She is a hero character, so you can bring her alongside your lord. Orion will be most pleased. As she is a wizard, her melee stats aren't fantastic, not a lot of armor, although she does have a physical resistance, no armor piercing damage, but does have magical attacks, and she is unbreakable, which is always nice. For her abilities, she has a couple of Winds of Magic buffs, Life Bloom to heal when she's casting, Ancient's Protection to give a 10% physical resistance map-wide when she's casting, and Wrath of the Wood to give damage to all friendly troops map-wide when she's casting. So when she's casting, she's doing a lot for her team. As for her spells, she has a mixture of different laws. Shield of Thorns and the Dwellers Below, as well as Tempest and Apotheosis, the healing spell, and then Word of Pain and Soul Stealer as well. So a nice mixture of offensive and defensive spells for hurting enemies or aiding allies. For her items, she has Berry Wine, a big 1300 health heal, which also gives 100% vigor. Another item, Acorn of the Oak of Ages, an armor-piercing explosion spell that also reduces speed by 48%, and Dart of Doom, which is a magic missile. So a very strong but also very expensive supporting hero. Onto some tree ladies now, with a Regiment of Renown version of the Dryads, Wraiths of the Frozen Heart. Their unit card is being compared to regular Dryads, so you can see the green tabs showing you the stats that they have over normal Dryads. A little more leadership, melee defense and melee attack. They've got the magical attacks and Frostbite to slow enemies by 36%. So mostly the same as regular Dryads, just a little bit stronger. And with the use of Frostbite, they can perhaps slow some enemies down that are trying to get away, allowing your other units to do more damage to that fleeing unit. So normal Dryads with a little trick up their sleeve. Or up their bark? And if you haven't had enough of lady units, here's the Blade Singers. These, as you might have guessed, are kind of like war dancers, just way stronger. They have armor piercing damage, most notably, as well as magical attacks and a bonus versus infantry, so lots of potential damage output. For the other stats, they got plenty of leadership, not a lot of armor of course, but they do have a physical resistance, nice melee defense at 42. They do have the dodge trait, but still a little bit vulnerable to missiles without any armor. They also have an immunity to psychology and an ability that lets them change up their weapon damage, reducing their armor piercing damage by 10, but increasing their base damage by 25. So that's going to be useful when they're fighting lighter targets. They can switch their weapon damage and do a bit more damage against those lighter targets. And if they're fighting something heavier, they can take that off and just have their normal weapon damage, which is nice and armor piercing. So basically, they can just murder all kinds of infantry very damn well. They are pretty expensive though, so you're probably not going to bring a ton of them in your army, unless you get to a point in your campaign where you're made of money. But overall, a very nice armor-piercing anti-infantry, something the Wood Elves have really been lacking. Onto a monstrous shock cavalry, Great Stag Knights. This unit is a very hard-hitting cavalry, kinda similar to Wild Riders overall, but they're armor-piercing, and they hit really freaking hard. They don't have a ton of melee attacks, so they really need their massive charge bonus to get the most damage out of themselves. They also don't have a lot of melee defense or armor, so they've got to be careful and not stay in combat too long. They do have a silver shield though to help them survive missiles, and a whopping 90 speed, which is unheard of for a cavalry that hits this hard. They also have frenzy, adding to their damage even more. They cause fear, they have a physical resistance. They've got it all going on, but they are very much a glass cannon unit. They can put out a lot of damage, but they can't really take it. So they're best off charging into infantry. They won't take other cavalry charges very well, so they want to try and avoid that. So overall, a very strong armor-piercing anti-infantry cavalry. If those weren't spooky enough for you though, then how about the Lost Silver Knights, the Regiment of Renown version of the Great Stag Knights? You can see the stat improvements on the unit card. They're being compared to regular Stag Knights. Bit more melee attack and melee defense, a little more leadership. No armor of course, as they are ethereal, so they have that 75% physical resistance. They also cause terror. Overall, their damage output is only a little bit better than regular Stag Knights, but obviously they are way tougher than regular Stag Knights, being ethereal. So just a very strong shock cavalry overall, going to be useful in the late game with that terror, although they do not come cheap. And if you ever felt that the Wood Elves were missing some turtle ogres, well, your prayers have been answered with the Zoats. They function very similarly to the dragon ogres, although lacking in the melee attack, so they really need to make use of their charge bonus to help them do a bit more damage, which is armor piercing and anti-large, so they can do well fighting monsters and cavalry. They also have magical attacks and dampen, which will reduce magic resistance by 22% for 10 seconds. So that could be very powerful in the right situations. But their big selling point is that they come with their own spells. They've got 2 spells at their disposal, which can be cast on either themselves or on allies. Earthblood, the healing spell, which can heal up to 4 units, and Flesh to Stone, which will give 60 armor. So while they are a great anti-large unit, they're also a great support unit for either themselves or their allies. And those spells are abilities, so they don't cost any winds of magic. So a very nice mobile anti-large choice with some great support options. If those weren't fancy enough for you though, then you could get the Enigmas of Giran, Regiment of Renown Zoats. You can see the stat improvements on the unit card, and their most notable difference is that they come with Flesh to Stone, as the regular Zoats did, but instead of Earthblood, they have Regrowth, which is a big single target heal that also restores Vigor. So going to perform the same role as those regular Zoats really, just a little bit better at the job with those improved stats and the change from Earthblood to Regrowth. Now we move over to the Ratmen, beginning with the 3-armed menace, Throt the Unclean. As a Footlord, his stats are pretty good, not a ton of armor though, but nice melee defense to try and help keep him safe. Not a ton of weapon strength, but it is armor piercing and anti-large, so he's going to be better at taking down those larger targets. He does have a physical resistance though, and a missile resistance to help keep him safe, and regeneration, so he is a lot tougher than he might seem. For his abilities, he's got Master Controller, which gives leadership and melee defense to nearby allies. He also has Remolded, which will give a massive 1400 healing, 8 leadership and 24 melee attack for 30 seconds to a monster unit, and only Clan Molder monster units, which is basically just any monster in the Skaven roster. So that's a very powerful ability in its own right, but he also has Beast Pack, which is a summon of Rat Ogres. That's right, he can summon a freaking unit of Rat Ogres. He also has the Creature Killer item, which will give a 16 bonus versus large and immunity to psychology to himself and nearby allies. So while he doesn't put out all the damage himself, he gets all of his monsters to do it for him. But if you do want him to do a little more damage, you can whack him on a Brood Horror, which will make him armor piercing, give him a bit more damage, poison attacks, and have that whopping 95 speed that Brood Horrors do have. So he can be just a pure strong supporting lord, or you can make him into a menace and be a supporting lord. Throt is not messing around. Speaking of not messing around, Gorrick is also not messing around. This big bad rat ogre is a new hero option for the Skaven, tons of weapon strength, anti-infantry armor piercing, great melee attack, not so much in the melee defense though, although reasonable armor, a ghastly charge bonus, fear and terror, you name it, he's an absolute bastard. For his abilities, he has Blood Shield, which can give magic resistance to himself and nearby allies, Warp Frenzy, an augment to himself, increasing his damage and melee attack, and Evisceration, a vortex spell cast on himself, which is good against armor. For his items, he has Sword of Anti-Heroes, which will increase his base and armor damage, as if he didn't have enough already, and Crown of Command, making him unbreakable or an ally for 30 seconds. So, as you might have guessed from all that, Gorrick is just an absolute damage powerhouse, who is classed as a Clan Molder monster, so he can receive healing as well. Good luck getting rid of him before he kills off half your army. Another new hero choice who looks a little bit less threatening, the Packmaster. His melee stats aren't anything too special, but he does have an anti-large bonus. But where this little fella shines is in his abilities. Running with the Pack is an augment to himself, which will give constant healing to up to 3 nearby monster units, activated only when he's in melee, so he can give healing when fighting alongside his monsters basically. He also has Shock Collar, an area augment which will increase melee attack, leadership, and give an immunity to psychology, again only to monsters though. So he's overall about supporting monsters. If you bring a monster heavy army, you're going to want 1 or 2 of these in there. And in campaign, he can actually summon wolf rats as one of his abilities. So he's a really nice little hero, brings some interesting stuff to the Skaven table. Does Skaven have tables? I don't know. But again, if you want to make him more formidable, Brood Horror. He does have the option as a mount, which will give him the big armor piercing damage and poison and the speed of the Brood Horror, as well as everything we just said. He also has 2 items, Skaven Brew, which will boost damage output but reduce armor of a friendly unit, and Scrying Stone, which will increase his own leadership and damage resistance for 15 seconds. So a very nice supporting hero to the monsters, who can also be a problem himself on the Brood Horror. Now to the monster units, beginning with the Wolf Rats. These are very much your Warhound type unit, as you might expect, except they have armor piercing damage, which is very nice, as well as magical attacks. They can receive healing as they are a monster unit. A very nice addition for the Skaven, they add the option of a fast flanking unit to get after missiles and things, as a Skaven didn't really have that. You had Doom Wheels and Doom Flayers, but they weren't fantastic for getting rid of missiles quickly. These will be, especially with that armor piercing damage. That kind of makes them a little bit more versatile as well, having the armor piercing. And there is also the poison option, who are a little bit different. They have the poison to bring the enemy stats down, but they don't have the armor piercing damage. Instead, they do have a little bit more damage, as you can see on the unit card, plus 10 over the regular wolf rats. So they can play the similar role of taking out missiles nice and quick, but they could go after skirmish cav as well. If they can get a touch on it, they can poison it, slow it down, and probably munch it down pretty damn quick. So 2 nice fast flanker options for the Skaven now. But the fastest and flankiest new option of them all is the Brood Horror itself. It's very quick for a big old monster at 95 speed. That's the first thing you might notice. decent armor-piercing weapon strength as well, and a nice charge bonus, so it's going to benefit from whizzing around a lot, getting that charge bonus all the time. Has regeneration, causes fear and terror, frenzy, a little bit of poison. It's got a lot going on for it. It's very powerful. However, it doesn't have a lot of melee defense or armor, so he's not as tough as he might look. The real problem with this thing is going to be holding on to him because he's so quick. He's going to be a fantastic harassing option. Now to a Regiment of Renown Pit Fighters of Hell's Deep. These are Regiment of Renown Rat Ogres. You can see the stat improvements over regular Rat Ogres on the unit card. A little bit tougher, a little bit more damage, but their main change is that they have Berserk, the same trait that Norscan Berserkers have, where the longer they fight, the more buffs they gain to increase their damage output. So quite simply, the same role as regular Rat Ogres, they're just going to be better at putting that damage out once you leave them in combat for a minute or two. And of course, as they are a Clan Molder monster, they can be healed, making them even more effective. If you want a little more ogre action though, then how about a Mutant Rat Ogre? This is a single Rat Ogre, it's not a unit, it's just one little fella, or big fella. It's basically like a budget Gorrick, honestly. It's got good armor-piercing weapon strength, magical attacks, frenzy, got a physical resistance to make up for its lack of armor, not a ton of melee defense, so it's not going to be the toughest in the world unless you keep charging him around, because he has a good charge bonus, good to make use of that to buff his melee attack, make him do more damage. Could be a great harassing unit due to his size, speed, and that massive charge bonus to make use of. Can also get the healing as well, so a very dangerous piece of kit, great at murdering enemy infantry. But guess what? There's a Regiment of Renown version 2 with Morskitar's Hellion. You can see his unit card being compared to the regular Mutant Rat Ogre, so some improvements to melee attack, melee defense, and leadership as usual. Has the magical attacks, armor piercing, damage, frenzy, blah 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 blah, all that stuff. And he also has Zap, which will increase enemy recharge time of units with abilities. So not too dissimilar to the regular Rat Ogre, just a little bit more damaging, maybe good at going after characters with that ability recharge slowdown, but otherwise just a nice damage dealer. And last but not least, the Thing. This is the Regiment of Renown Hellpit Abomination. You can see the stat improvements, usual stuff. Has the fear and terror, the regeneration, it can be healed as well as a Clan Molder monster, and it has one unique ability, Fluid Injection, cast on itself, increasing its armor piercing damage, melee attack, and base damage, as well as going into Rampage though. So going to have a similar role to the regular Hellpit Abomination, I think, just going to be better at the job with those extra damage boosts to kill things a little bit quicker, or maybe a little bit quicker. The real scary thing about all these new monsters though is the healing that they're going to be able to receive. That is going to make them a lot tougher, a lot more dangerous, and a lot harder to get rid of. So there you go, all the new units for the Wood Elves and Skaven in the Twisted and Twilight DLC. Definitely some nice new strong units in there for the Wood Elves specifically, but Skaven gaining all those monsters and the healing is going to really change the game up for them, I think, and give them even more playstyles to potentially choose from. Either way, nice additions for both factions. I hope you've enjoyed this, thanks for watching, I will see you in the future.